The following programming is made possible through a generous donation from Randall Lewis, Executive Vice President of Upland-based Lewis Operating Companies.
Ron Loveridge, Director of the Center for Sustainable Suburban Development. This is a continuing series, the Randall Lewis Seminar Series. We look at major issues facing our region and our place. And today we are honored to have one of the really outstanding, I'm not sure I'd use the word experts, but one of the outstanding people who have devoted serious time and serious attention to this question about regions and particularly regional governance. I looked, as you do, on the website, and there was an interesting description of William R. Dodge on a city-state that I just would like to read by way of introduction. It said, among American regionalists, William R. Bill Dodge is regarded as a lead thinker and facilitator, a man who's worked effectively over 3 decades to help regional communities identify their critical challenges and build collaborations that address a whole range of tough challenges, from balanced growth to fiscal and ethnic disparities to creating effective regional decision-making networks. That's the city-state's sort of profile, but Bill, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got into this quest for regional governance.
Thank you, Ron, and thanks for this opportunity to share some thoughts. You've been one of my heroes for a considerable amount of time, and when I wrote a book a number of years ago on regions called Regional Excellence, you were very, very supportive of the book and helped me with it, and I really do appreciate what you have done. I have had a passion about regional cooperation. What you earlier read, talking about 3 decades, it's now 4 decades I've been wrestling with that particular topic. And strictly by accident, careers only make sense in hindsight, I ended up having the right sort of background to get into that subject. I had worked in local government, starting a model cities program in the District of Columbia, Department of Planning and Development in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, state government, starting a budget office in the state of Ohio, the federal government, being a budget examiner for the Bureau of the Budget, the private sector, working for the Chamber of Commerce, and the academic sector. And these are all the people that you need to bring together to deal with these sort of common challenges. But for the last couple of decades, pretty much I've devoted my attention to fostering regional cooperation, as my interests went from just looking at housing to urban affairs to regional affairs. And the last real job I had, according to the way my son looks at it, was heading up the National Association of Regional Councils, which represents all the regional planning organizations across the country.
Located in D.C.?
Located in D.C., right.
Now, one of the questions that I always ask undergraduates at UCR is, what do you want to be when you're 40? And if I asked you that question when you were going to Cornell, you would not have said you were going to be devoting your time to regional governance.
Absolutely no way. I think you take advantage of opportunities as time goes on. And what I usually find is I like to go after something that's a little bit new and different and challenging. But what I find is I still use the base of what I've done historically, and over time that accumulates into some, I hope sometimes, wisdom about what I'm now engaging in.
Well, your book, Regional Excellence, you brought together information I don't think you can find anywhere else. What's the book about, and what was the purpose in writing it?
Well, you hit it on it, I think, fairly directly. It was very difficult, and this goes back to the late 90s. It was very difficult to find any sort of collective information about regional cooperation, who was doing what, with what sort of success to deal with challenges, and then sort of looking across what array of tools do you really need to have the capacity to address regional challenges. So the book was an attempt to not share everything, but share really what seemed to be the most successful things and maybe some of the cutting edge things that were going on around regional cooperation. When I came out with the book, I fully expected that it would trigger an onslaught of people looking at exactly the same subject and putting together similar sort of documents. And unfortunately, that has not happened. If you really want to understand regional cooperation, you almost have to collect information region by region, organization by organization. There's very little good collective information about regional cooperation.
Just talk a little bit, I mean, I guess for people who are watching this, is why worry about regional cooperation? But if you make the argument that the 21st century is the century of regions, that's where economic development takes place, that's where quality of life is experienced. As we look at places, regions become central to both explanation and good things happening. But could you comment on the importance of regions?
Yeah, I think in many ways the regions have become the new local in terms of dealing with common sort of challenges. I think of regions, and this image helps me and maybe helps others, I think of regions as really being living organisms. They're places that started out as small settlements. This region, of course, starting out as a mission, evolving to becoming a small town, then to becoming a city. It began to see development outside of the city limits. It expanded the city limits to some degree. Eventually, the growth was happening so explosively that newly incorporated areas were created outside the city limits. Over time, the region expanded beyond one county to be multiple counties, and now in many ways it's expanded well into inland Southern California as well, and will continue to expand over time. Over that period of time, we have spent a great deal more money figuring out how to divide up the region, how to create separate and independent local governments, to do everything in a divided sort of way than we have figured out how to keep the region itself as a living organism healthy, how to build the connections that need to make the region truly work. Regions have become important primarily, I think, for two reasons. One, they become the driver for any nation's economy. These are the places that in many ways have the, if you can look at it as this image, the competitive stalls in the global farmer's market. If you're going to compete in the global farmer's market, it has to be at a regional scale to bring in the people, the tools, the resources to mount economic activities. But it's also, interestingly enough, has become the new local, in the sense it's the place where you've got enough, covering enough geography and bringing enough people together that you can collectively reach decisions and pursue strategies that deal with the thorniest issues challenging us.
Teach a local government class. I use a textbook by Dennis Judge and Todd Swanstrom called Urban Politics, and one of their central themes in the book is they talk about the fragmentation that's they talk about counties and cities and school districts and special districts, and they end up sort of despairing about regions being able to get their act together. What do you do with that kind of political science verdict?
Well, having labored in the trenches of regional cooperation, I can sympathize with that analysis. However, we've accomplished some incredible things over the years. My heroes are the people who have dedicated their lives to fostering cooperation. It's the pursuit of the marathoner. It's not the pursuit of the sprinter. It takes long and difficult efforts, and unfortunately, even if you succeed, and often you do, no one offers any thanks for what you have been able to accomplish. So I think in many ways, regional cooperation has worked fairly successfully, given its limitations. We tend to talk about having a capacity to address regional challenges, and we often refer to it as a network. We've got regional organizations and processes and some outside funding and a variety of things that we can pull together, but no one ever attempts to describe what the network is and how it works or doesn't work. in addressing these common sort of challenges. We talk about dealing with regional challenges often with terms like muddling through. We've been able to sort of come together and have some conversations, and often the only thing that has saved us when we got stuck was state and federal government, which came along and set the ground rules, provide the funding for the planning, provide the funding to carry things out. And unfortunately, state and federal government isn't necessarily going to play that sort of role in the future.
Somebody described this new fend for yourself federalism. That,
Yes.
Yeah, the Judd and Swanstron's in the end described the future as going to be one of muddling through, but there is I think, as important a book that I've read in the last 10 years by Bruce Katz and Jennifer Bradley called The Metropolitan Revolution, which they talk about the new competition is going to be one of cooperation. Your take on and they looked across regions across the country and found collaboration works, and regions which were succeeding are the regions who figured out how to collaborate better.
Yeah, I think using the term revolution is not an improper term for what is probably needed if we're going to address regional challenges. One of the regional planning directors that I work with said we've become very good at playing pickup regional cooperation. We've become very good at assembling the people who want to come together using the tools that are out there, often without any good rules about how to deal with these challenges, and then we're expected to play championship regional cooperation against very, very tough challenges. I think Bruce Katz's book makes a real contribution along these lines, but I think it's a limited contribution in some ways because it stops at our borders. And in many ways, the most useful things, the most useful work that's going on in regional cooperation these days is happening overseas. We do not make a great deal of an investment in this country in coming up with new models for addressing common sort of challenges like regional ones. But overseas, they create research institutes, they undertake demonstrations, they create new forms of regional governance, and I think in many ways they're working for them.
Yeah, how about a couple particulars? How does that, in Europe, how is regional governance differ in Europe from what we have here?
Well, I think the large differences in Europe, in the European community, when they drafted a constitution for the European community, they created what's called the Committee of the Regions. Every region in Europe has a representative on this Committee of the Region, and the Committee of the Region, by the Constitution, is empowered to weigh in on any issue before the Parliament that has regional sort of implications. They also play the key role in distributing the value-added tax that's collected by the European community to foster regional economic development throughout Europe. So here's a case where the regions are built right into the decision-making process. The Committee of the Regions also funds regional studies institutes across Europe, and they're constantly in the process of conducting studies on what they call subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is their term for having the most local people do what can be done in a common way, and local has increasingly become regions. I must get invitations once a month to present a paper or attend some sort of conference on developing new ideas for fostering regional cooperation.
How about our next door neighbor, Canada? What do they do in terms of regional government?
Canada is very interesting. They have a long history, it goes back through most of my career, of trying new experiments to figure out how to strengthen governance in their regions. And if you look at the history of Montreal or Toronto or even Quebec, you see they have tried different sort of approaches to fostering regional cooperation over the years. In Canada, for reasons I don't fully understand, the provinces have no reluctance to sort of say thou shalt and say this is the form of governance you will have. And interestingly enough, they don't get a lot of resistance locally to that. If we tried that sort of behavior in this country, we would not get very far. You go elsewhere in the world, And it's not so much that they're doing a sophisticated analysis and investigation as is happening in Europe or Canada, but in the rest of the world, most of the larger regions now have some form of regional governments. If they're big enough, like Shanghai or Beijing, they are actually provinces or states. And in other places, they create some form of a prefecture government or something. They don't do anything to change all the other governments. They just, in a way, have thrown in the towel and say we need a regional government to handle issues that are common across regions.
When you look across the United States, there's textbooks tend to point to Minneapolis, St. Paul. They tend to point to Portland. Once in a while, Dade County, where a county is sort of assumed governance. Could you comment on what are some, in your view, best examples of governance, regional governance that works in the United States?
The way you ask the question, frames a bit of the answer. Generally, the list stops with the places that you identified. That there's a metro planning and service delivery district in the Portland region, which has a directly elected board by the people, and they refer to Metro as being their major tourist attraction. Everybody comes and visits, but nobody ever mimics what we have done here. We have a couple places that have attempted to really wrestle with the question of building the capacity to govern. There's a Metro government in Minneapolis-St. Paul that was created by the state, and all the members are appointed by state offices. The one in Portland, Oregon is much more, in a sense, democratic. It was approved by, a charter was put together to create Metro. It was approved by the voters. They directly elect the board for the Metro government, and they provide the resources required to the Metro government to carry out the services as expected to carry out.
Resources come from
either fees or from taxes or whatever other sources. They have some general taxing powers. They also get fees, like when they deliver solid waste services and things like that. And the voters in Portland, Oregon are empowered at any point to add new responsibilities to that particular Metro government. But we really have not done that elsewhere. Now, that's not to say there isn't great things elsewhere. We have regional planning organizations in 300 or more of the regions across the country. And some of them, such as SCAG in this region, do absolutely extraordinary things. They're voluntary associations of government empowered often by federal and state legislation. And the representatives on their boards are the representatives that come from the local governments. But when it works, they are very effective in pulling together people that deal with common challenges.
I give very high marks to SCAG and Hassan Akrada, who's the executive director and the regional council. Given their mission and role, I'm not sure we could expect any better out of. So the Portland model hasn't been, people have gone to visit and listen, but hasn't taken form.
They say they do not get a lot of return visits
in your article that was in the Public Administration Review, you talk about one of the things that regions need is regional leadership. And I know from cities we tend to focus on our own city limits. Everybody sort of focuses on if you're in a school, you focus on school, or if you're in water, or if you're in air and transportation. Could you comment on the importance of regional leadership and some examples that have worked other places where you developed regional leaders?
Well, good question. And we do need regional leaders, and what I would call almost as a same term, regional citizens. We truly need to have an abundance of people who are willing to become knowledgeable about regional challenges and practice regional citizenship, to become engaged in pursuing particular challenges, to work with regional organizations to develop strategies for dealing with challenges, and then maybe most importantly, be willing to lead the parades that often have to be led to make local officials feel comfortable about dealing with challenges which are always difficult, and come up with approaches that are almost always controversial. You need to have that sort of support. There are a number of regional leadership programs across the country that have been put together to train people to be regional leaders. A lot of them are run like the leadership programs you see at a more local level in a county, for example, often run by a chamber of commerce. You go one day a week for a year, and you come out of that with sort of a certification that you're now a leader, and maybe the suggestions on where you can apply that leadership. Now that same sort of model is being used at a regional level, often run the same way, though one of my favorite ones is in the Atlanta region, where if you are a student for a particular year, you're literally taken away for a week to somewhere else with the other students and sort of run through a boot camp on regional cooperation. One of the most powerful parts of these programs is they now have alumni programs. And those alumni programs often are the ones who get involved in aiding and abetting and dealing with addressing a particular challenge or becoming involved in pursuing a particular agenda. Or one of the most powerful things they do in the Atlanta region is they actually develop curricula that is used in the schools to introduce students at a very young age that you're part of a city or a county or a state or a nation, but you're also part of a region. So.
Irvine Foundation came in and took a look at inland Southern California, and their diagnosis was that the most important problem was regional leadership. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I understand they've done the same thing when they went to Fresno. They looked at Fresno's problems, and if someone here wanted to try to put together, is there a website one goes to? Is there a text? How does one find out about best practices in sort of setting up regional leadership?
Well, I can provide my email address, williamr.dodge@aol.com. It's still difficult to easily tap that sort of information. There is an association of leadership programs, but it tends to focus more on the most local leadership programs. The best thing to do to pursue what's going on regionally is go to an Oklahoma City or go to an Atlanta, go to the places that have regional leadership programs and talk to them about sponsoring or getting those sort of programs started. There are other models. There are a couple places that actually offer what I would call Regional Cooperation 101. These are programs where you can go one night a week or one night a month or however you want to do it for 10 sessions, and it'll give you an orientation to the region and how to become involved in fostering regional cooperation. We have had over the years the creation of regional civic groups. These are groups of citizens who foster regional challenges. And the one in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area is probably as responsible as anyone else for the fact that there is a regional government in that region. And they also have a fiscal disparities program where they share revenues across the region. The difficulty is regional civic organizations have a very difficult time surviving over time. So most of them end up with a half-life of probably less than a decade, never to be heard from again. But we need more of that. Sort of groups. We need to establish groups that are sort of like regional cheers, if you remember the TV show, where you can go and get training, you can go and get support, you can go and share your woes with others, and really become engaged in fostering regional cooperation.
One of the problems for the inland region is one, its size, its scale, a big place, the two counties of Riverside and San Bernardino. It has over 50 cities, I don't know how many school districts and special districts. Southern California used to have sort of major banks and so forth, but aside from the gas company and the Edison company, it's hard to see businesses which go across much of county lines or Southern California. someone has to, seems to me, to be a champion of these regional, where does a region find the kind of champions of regional governance?
Region ends up being used to refer to almost any group of interest, all the way from adjoining neighborhoods to adjoining cities to adjoining counties to what we see as these regional living organisms, to groups of states, nations, whatever. I think inland Southern California, if it were located a lot of places in the country, would be large enough to be its own independent region, regional living.
4.2 million people.
But both the curse and the blessing for inland Southern California is that it's part of a larger region, which is greater Los Angeles, and so it needs to make sure that organism works, but at the same time really needs to look at what the common challenges are that cut across these two counties and create enough of a pressure, even a threat of a crisis, certainly offer opportunity, where coming together is going to be a much more powerful approach than continuing to do things alone. Where does the leadership come from? I think in many ways it comes because you have individuals who are already somewhat committed to this sort of approach, and then it's the question of identifying them and empowering them to pursue those sorts of common challenges. There are all sorts of stories of success across the country, and they've been going on for years and years and years. And unfortunately, we don't hear the names so much. But anytime you can think of a place, for example, in the last couple of decades, that has wrestled with creating some sort of regional mass transit and had to go to the electorate to get a vote to finance that, often repeated times, look at the list of people that were engaged in that particular effort, and you'll find the regional champions. These are the people who realize they're pursuing something that's going to take time, it's going to get difficult, they're going to get a lot of challenges and pushback. And I think the real challenge for us is to identify those folks and offer them the support, to make sure there's resources out there that support them when they pursue those sort of challenges. And they aren't just summarily dismissed when they try to make their case in the institutions in the region.
Katz and Bradley talk in their book about Denver and its ability to cooperate. One of the things that at least the former mayor I was caught by is kind of mayor's council and the greater Denver metropolitan area.
That's very true. The mayor's council there has played a role in all of the efforts to create some sort of common approaches. The greater Denver region even has a regional asset district where they have a dedicated tax that is used strictly to support cultural and recreational, probably all too many sports stadia, but the whole purpose is to cover things that are of regional importance for which there is no regular source of funding to support that those particular activities. So they've been very creative in that region in terms of fostering regional cooperation.
I've often thought that the universities, there are 16 colleges and universities in inland Southern California, but the universities have a special, almost seeming responsibility to be interested in regional governance. Could you comment on the role the universities can play?
Yeah, the universities are one of the last, in some ways, of our assets that is still sort of tied to geography. And most regions, if they honestly look at where their students come from and where they go, most of them end up within the region where they are located. So it's a natural thing, I think, for organizations, universities, to get engaged in the particular region they're in, just from the sake of attracting students and funding and being able to deliver services. There are some very successful regional studies institutes The Institute for Portland Metropolitan Studies, for example, at Portland State University, is constantly engaged in doing research and analysis of regional challenges, including getting into governance questions of one sort or the other. There's a whole group of universities, which I think now number 60, around 60, that have signed a pledge of being metropolitan universities. And they actually get together periodically and share insights about what they're doing and how they're approaching things. So, I mean, I think that's fertile ground. I understand there's well over a dozen colleges and universities in inland Southern California. What if they all got together and says, okay, we need to, in this region, create some sort of capacity to support the people who are trying to foster regional cooperation, especially those who are trying to strengthen our capacity to address these challenges. I think out of those meetings, out of that coming together, could emerge some sort of a regional studies institute to support regional initiatives in the Inland Empire.
I went to a conference several weeks ago put on by the Santa Ana Water Planning Shed Authority. And it was interesting to me because you saw a cooperation here of water districts cooperating, flood control districts cooperating, forestry people were, that rather than fight, there was cooperation as they understood how important water was from the source down to the ocean. Are watersheds one example of regional cooperation and integration?
Definitely. And not only watersheds, but airsheds, because air does the same thing that water does in every sense of the word. No, and this creates one of the difficulties of fostering regional cooperation. You can't just pick a piece of geography and assume everything fits within that piece of geography. In some ways, the piece of geography that you need to look at is defined by the challenge that you're wrestling with. And when you look at a watershed, it could be a completely different piece of geography than when you look at an airshed, or when you're looking at shaping growth, or when you're looking at a variety of other challenges. So one of the difficulties of fostering regional governments, of strengthening regional governance, is you can't create the simple one geographic boundary, one government approach to deal with every challenge. You have to build in a certain amount of flexibility to change those boundaries, to change the powers and responsibilities to deal with different sort of challenges. But no, watersheds have been a very driving force in getting people to work together cooperatively.
Bill, you wrote an article that was in the Public Administration Review in 2010. It's called Practitioner's Perspective, Regional Charters, the Future of Local Government. Obviously, time has passed since this article has written, but maybe you could do two things. One, comment on what the proposal was, and then second, how it's been assessed by those who have sort of been thinking about regional governance.
Yeah, I'm now doing a lot of thinking about the future of regional cooperation, and it might be the most challenging task I've taken on in my career of fostering regional cooperation, because there's a lot of things that point to difficulties of continuing to do the things the way we've always done them. Especially given that state and federal governments are now consumed with so many other tasks that they don't want to play their traditional role of stepping in and bailing us out.
So regions are on their own.
Regions are very much on their own. Funding has become more increasingly difficult to find. Everything is so polarized, it's very difficult to put collaboration together. And so what I've been wrestling with is the question of, if the way we're doing things now isn't serving us well, and in many ways it isn't, what could we do to strengthen our capacity to deal with common challenges? And of course, what comes to mind first is sort of notion of charters. Because with charters, we have empowered local governments, we've empowered cities, counties, states, others with the powers and often the resources they need to address the challenges that fall within their geography. But at the regional level, we still have this very informal, amorphous network for dealing. what if we use the notion of a charter to sort of guide our thinking about creating new models for governance in regions, building on what's there. I'm not saying take it away, build on, and not with the expectation we're ever going to have regional government. That's still pretty much anathema in this country. But with the realization that if we don't do something to strengthen governance, the public itself will start clamoring for some forms of regional government. And when they do, they generally go to state legislatures and they end up with a solution that is far from perfect to deal with that particular challenge. What if we got people together and we actually thought through this question of how do we want to govern this region when it grows up? And what are the tools we'll need? What are the components of such an agreement? I call it a regional charter only to give the sense it needs to have some of the force and impact of what we have already for local governments and state and federal government, and something that can be adopted by voters, something that gets updated. I would suggest updating it after each census so you can sort of look again at whether we got the right geography and whatever. But the most important thing is having that disciplined discussion about governance. We spend a lot of time talking about all of the particular issues like transportation or air quality or environmental protection or whatever, but we never hardly talk about what capacity we need to actually pursue those particular sort of challenges.
For this discussion or conversation, what's the table look like initially? who needs to sit at the table?
I think it's the old rule about there's always empty seats at the table. I think you invite people to participate. If you get a handful that are willing to start the conversation, you leave empty seats, and as other people decide they want to join in, you allow them to join in as well. I would start actually with getting a group of people together to just look at the subject. What is the state of governance in the region? Yeah. What do we do well? What don't we do well? Which components work? Which ones don't work? Where can we build on what we have? Where do we need to break new ground? I think we don't really even fully understand how well we do governance. Having done that, then I think we need to be able to sort of create the momentum to take it the next step and actually get a group together and begin to seriously look at what would be the components of a charter for the region.
Counties are in some sense regional governments. Why don't they do this?
That's a very good question. In many cases, the county still represents a substantial part of a particular region, a particular region of living organism. In many cases now, of course, the region looks more like Greater LA, where there's no one county that can do anything on its own. It has to work with its neighboring counties to do things in a collaborative way. But I think it's a good question. Why haven't counties taken on more of that role? And actually, in many cases, counties are taking on more of that role. As there is a group of metropolitan universities, there's a group now called themselves urban counties, and they might as well call themselves metropolitan counties because they're wrestling with the common challenges that cut across their geography. I think in many cases, especially more towards the east, where I have more familiarity than the west, counties have been constrained by their historic association with state governments. And state governments have thought of municipalities as, in some ways, units of government that sort of escaped out of the fold, but counties are still under our control. They are our delivery agents, and I think there's been much more reluctance to free counties up to play the broad set of roles they could play to be regional governance entities. And I say that with full recognition that now in many cases counties can create their own home rule charters, they can pursue their own sorts of activities. But there's this history that's been hard to overcome in many counties to change from being a service delivery organization to actually being a planning and problem-solving organization for the county.
Well, two kind of connected questions. One, let me just read a paragraph from your article which says, a major test for regional charter councils negotiating compacts to shape future regional growth to ensure the development is competitive and sustainable and infrastructure and services are high quality and affordable. To do this, regional charter councils could provide safe havens to sponsor dialogues on innovative, practical, and probably controversial actions required to shape future growth. Even the most dedicated local governments cannot succeed if there is a lack of agreement on the future growth of the region and the impact of that growth on all jurisdictions, rich and poor. That's the call to action, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You use a word here that compact, which some comments that I've heard about the article is that the word compact is better than the word charter. Could you react to that? Is this just language? Does it make any difference whether you talk about a regional compact or regional charter?
I think it's in my case, what I'm trying to do is suggest a new and fresh look at a subject that has been wrestled with historically with mixed results. We use the term compact to refer to almost any agreement that takes place between two or more hopefully willing groups. And in the term compact, sometimes we build in a very specific notion of how the compact works. Some compacts are even given real powers. They are actually given access to real resources. They are monitored and held accountable by real accountability measures, and they, in many ways, operate just like a charter government. In other cases, you have compacts that have none of the above, and they often have very short half-lives, and they don't necessarily succeed. I'm not questioning at all whether the term compact is a good question. I'm really questioning whether when a compact is put together, it's put together with the tools that it needs to succeed.
Sure.
And I use only the term charter to sort of make people think about, well, if we were creating a local government, what would we think about in terms of tools? Because I think it broadens the discussion and deepens the discussion to think of it in terms of creating a charter as opposed just to creating a compact. Compact, unfortunately, has become a term that all too easily is used to protect everybody's turf. And what we need to do is reach a comfort level with sharing sovereignty. We have to get the actors to agree that if we're going to succeed, we have to share a bit of our real authority and power to make it succeed.
Stay with that concept of shared sovereignty, because that's not one that I was familiar with, but I think it's a very, very important kind of concept. What do you mean by shared sovereignty?
That if we are going to succeed in dealing with common sort of challenges, we're going to have to differentiate between what we can do alone and successfully, individual community by individual community, against what we need to be able to do to come together cooperatively to do it. And we know full well that we have no clout to do anything collectively unless we are willing to give up a bit of our power to this common sort of entity. So that, and often what happens when we put compacts together, we end up having a jurisdiction that says, well, you might like that, but I'm not going to play ball. If we haven't, in some ways, pre-committed to getting together and collectively carry out the result, we really don't have a compact in practice. And the community that doesn't want to participate can just back out and not participate. In a way, we've depended upon outsiders to achieve that end. Take something like transportation. This region does not have to get any federal money for transportation. But if it's going to get federal money for transportation, the jurisdictions have to share the sovereignty of collectively making a decision on how those resources are going to be used. And if anybody backs out of that, they are immediately precluded from being a recipient of any of the resulting funding. We have to not depend on state and federal government to do that to us. We have to be willing to belly up to the bar and say, we will agree to do that. Now, I think what could sweeten that deal, quite honestly, is if we agree to take on the responsibility for making those common decisions, then the deal we could negotiate with the federal and state governments, which I call the grand bargain, or the Magna Charter, we could actually ask federal and state governments, okay, we've agreed to take on this challenge, approve with the way we're doing it, give us some sort of authorization to proceed. If we need enabling legislation, give it to us. But most important, give us the flexibility to use funding and the flexibility to apply regulations because we've collectively taken on. So I think there's sweeteners that can make the sharing of sovereignty much more appealing at the regional level. And I think now is the time to do it in many ways, because state and federal governments feel they are in a very weak position to provide this leadership sort of role.
Well, there's some interesting examples in Southern California. Well, in transportation, Southern California Association of Governments has they have regional transportation plan, and they got, with that, thanks to legislation in Sacramento, SB 375, there was sustainable community strategies. Last time it was adopted unanimously. I think whether you're an environmentalist or a developer or a business person, there was enormous applause for this sort of regional planning effort. I think everyone agrees water has been done extraordinarily well in Southern California in building capacity. I think the South Coast Air Quality District is the best in the world at what it does. The water, at least the Santa Ana watershed seems to me another example of a national best practice. We have in Western Riverside County the multi-species plan, which is another, I think, national. So there are pieces of this governance things around. But one of the things, Bill, that you've been often invited to regions who say, help, well, what should we do? Inland Southern California, one of the complications, as you said, we're also part of the greater Southern California region, but looking at what's called Inland Southern California, or particularly in San Bernardino County, they refer to as Inland Empire. This Riverside County is going to be the second largest county in population in California. Is that San Bernardino, the fourth largest? Growth is coming. We're trying to talk about our identity and our future, and to try to pull things together so we're going to like what we see. And if you were talking to, invited to this regional table, whoever's around the regional table, what would you tell us? I mean, you've been here. Your sons are now businessmen in Los Angeles. What kind of recommendations would you have for us in inland Southern California?
Well, I would second what you're already saying. We've had some great successes in this region. We've had great successes in regions across the country. I think the practical thing I would suggest is take a look at those successes. We are very reluctant to do any governance postmortems on anything that we do. Why did it succeed? What were the obstacles to succeeding? I think one of the interesting questions I ask people is, how many years did it take to make one of these things happen? And how much of the political and resource energy of the region was consumed by what turned out to be very ineffective ways of making decisions about governance? And in the process, how many other issues were neglected or not addressed that should have been addressed? Historically, I think things were coming at a pace where we could somewhat either get engaged in something and deal with it, or we could sort of put off dealing with particular challenges for a while. Now all these challenges are coming at us so rapidly and so forcefully that we can't muddle through, and we no longer are rich enough to spend profligate amounts of money on ineffective approaches. We got to get it right the first time in terms of dealing with these challenges. So I think it would be a very useful experience to have leaders look at. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of how we did this. What can we learn from that? And how can we sharpen our ability to deal with the next round of challenges? I think our fatal flaw is that we just assume governance will take care of itself, and we don't make the investments in strengthening our capacity to deal with these challenges. So we've done great things. I don't want to set anybody else up as a model per se, but you get to Europe, you get to China. I was in Shanghai. Shanghai is building a new mass transit line annually. Something that we talk about taking 2 or 3 decades to do.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want us to mimic that, but I want us to have the capacity at the regional level that if we make our commitment to something, we've got the resources and the ability to move it as quickly ahead as we can within the constraints of what we think is the best way of dealing with things. I don't want people to talk about, we raise the question, we can't talk about that, for example, to stop anything from getting started, or not being able to have some options for how you get approvals from the public, options for how you're going to finance things. These are all things that we have to almost ad hoc for each new challenge. And can't we do a better approach to dealing with these common sort of challenges?
I guess in the past we've done much of these problems separately, and I guess we recognize they're interrelated and need to be interconnected. So.
Right, exactly.
Preview of coming attractions. I know you're working on a book. Can you tell us what kind of framework you've identified and when you see it completed?
Well, you've already picked up on the theme. It's the same theme as the article that I did for PAR. It's really looking at the question of regional charters, or if not charters, regional compacts, but looking at a way to strengthen our capacity to foster regional cooperation. I've been doing a lot of traveling overseas. I've been looking at what goes on in other places. I've learned a lot from those experiences. I've looked at some of the best cutting edge stuff that goes on in this country. And I'm trying to figure out what are the components that every one of these regional charters is going to have, even if they differ in shape or appearance or whatever, so that as we belly up to the bar, as we get the courage to take on this topic, then we've got a bit of guidance about how to put together a regional compact, a regional charter to strengthen the governance of our region, or strengthen our capacity to address common challenges.
Bill, thank you for your work. Thank you for being one of the leading regional citizens of this country, as you describe it. Somebody also knows what's going on outside our own national borders. Thank you for this conversation this morning. I think this question of how you develop regional capacity to work together for the future, where resources are not going to be coming from Sacramento and Washington, but coming from the region itself, and how we do this, and that we can't continue to do what we've done in the past, in part as you suggested, because things are coming so quickly. We thank you for this morning and for the kind of ideas that have been in this exchange. So, Bill Dodge, thanks for participating in the seminar. Any final comments you'd like to make?
Well, Ron, thank you for this opportunity. And I would suggest to get the ball rolling, not necessarily your email address or phone number, but if this triggers interest from individuals in the region, they need some place where they can make contact with others who have a similar sort of interest and begin to have discussions about, okay, what can we collectively do to strengthen our capacity to address challenges? And I think that's the way it's going to start. It's a handful of people getting together who agree to make a commitment to become involved in this, and then they're going out to engage others and going out to various organizations and especially funders to actually get a conversation going and maybe produce a report on the state of governance in the inland Southern California. So thank you.
Well, Bill, thank you.
Established in 2003, the UCR Center for Sustainable Suburban Development explores the social, economic, political, and environmental impacts that population growth and movement has on cities and local communities. The center facilitates interdisciplinary collaborations in the community through its staff and affiliated faculty via research, joint conferences, workshops, and public forums held at UCR and in the community. The center produces the Randall Lewis Seminars, which focus on a wide range of regional sustainability topics such as air and water resources, infrastructure and transportation, and the fiscal health of cities. For information or questions about this program, to learn more about future programming planned for the Randall Lewis Seminar Series, or to register and/or receive email announcements from UCR's Center for Sustainable Suburban Development, please contact the Center at 951-827-7830 or email at shana.conaway@ucr.edu.